Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. My name is Jack Kilby from The Hannibal TV and Great North Wrestling, and we are very pleased to have some luminaries on the podcast today. The first being Frank Dux, who is a very accomplished martial artist and the man ultimately behind the Bloodsport movie, and really groundbreaking MMA journalist, competitor, Bob Carson. We're going to touch on a variety of topics tonight. But first, as always, we have to throw to the draw of the program, the King of Connecticut. How are you tonight, King?
You know, Jack Kilby, I love you, brother. But maybe the Canadian education system is lagging. Phonics, my man. It's Frank Dukes.
Thank
Okay.
I apologize.
Frank Dukes. Come on, Jack. Come on, Jack.
I only went to grade 10.
Frank Dukes. No, Dukes.
Come on, brother.
Dukes.
Frank, put up your Dukes. And speaking of put up your Dukes, Saturday night's all right for fighting. And we got the man who's responsible for the greatest fighting movie of all time. I would say the most influential combat sports movie of all time. One of my absolute favorite movies, Bloodsport. And what an amazing life and story this man has. You want to talk about old school? This is the epitome of old school, Frank Dukes. And we're honored to have you on the show this evening. And I've got down there in the lower left-hand corner, one and only Bullet Bob Carson, a man that I had in studio at Berman Law Group to discuss the seedy past of the Ultimate Fighting Championships and a story that not a lot of people know about. Who are the Fertitta brothers? Who is Dana White? And I'm telling you, you got to go back here on Hannibal TV in the archives and watch that episode. So, gentlemen, it is our honor to welcome you tonight on this Saturday night to the Old School Shooters.
Thank you. I appreciate it. My honor. My pleasure to be here.
So I want to get started, obviously, with Frank and talk to the folks. I mean, everybody knows this movie. It's an iconic movie. And the one question that I always wondered was, you had a book originally that predated the movie, and was it based somewhat on, obviously based on your story, but how influential was the book in all of that?
Well, if you're asking me what is the genesis of Bloodsport, let me
Sure.
start with the fact that Black Belt Magazine, it took a picture of me in 1976 holding my trophy, which was really a gag trophy. The real award I got was a sword. They gave me this big old trophy. In fact, let's see if I can angle it here so you guys can maybe you see it up there. See it all up there?
Yeah.
All right. So that was a kind of a gag gift given to me by my Black Dragon brothers. People don't understand the Kumite fights, which is MMA today, was our way of having a rite of passage. It was our way of saying, yeah, are you really a fighter or are you just theoretical? And so you'd have to go through these kind of hardcore fights. And we didn't have gloves in those days. If you're lucky, sometimes they'd let you take a sponge and you could take the sponge over your knuckles. But that was about as far as it went, wrapping wise and working with it. But so you had Masayama, who fought 100 fights 2 days in a row, 200 fights to prove his rite of passage, if you will, when he wanted to breathe life into the Kyokushinkai movement in martial arts. So the Black Dragons have been doing this since the 1930s. We've had these events. Black Belt Magazine heard about it, and they pursued I think Dave German, a few of the members So finally they got permission and they talked to me. And that happened in like 1979 or so. So we do this interview. They verify the event. They see fight footage. They see all that stuff. It's no different than the producers of Bloodsport did. And at that time, I said, you know what? I better protect this. So I went out and I wrote a treatment and a screenplay, registered it with the WGA. But it was written as more of an honor to my instructor, Senzo Tanaka, who's they used to call him the ninja. Okay, that was his sort of like fight handle. Although he really was, but we never refer to ourselves in that way. Anybody who's real doesn't use the term ninja. Ninja was actually a role-playing term for people who are trying to preserve some old folk tale and culture, no difference than you have a Renaissance fair today, okay, in Japan. It's really interesting how it all morphed into a martial art. There's no such thing as ninjutsu as a martial art. Let me make that very clear. Anybody telling you that is taking advantage of you. So we had this, I had the thing written up, and it was under the title Return of the Ninja. That was the original title of Bloodsport. But because Canon Films had come out with a thing called Enter the Ninja, everybody's going to think it's like a sequel to it. So he said, this thing had to get changed. So what ended up happening is it was like, I think it was just 1981, and I turned over a guy named Peter Deal. Peter Deal is the actual first producer of Bloodsport, not Mark DeSalle. Peter took it to the AFM. We almost cut a deal with Vestron Entertainment with Anastasia Jenkins. I still remember was the person we submitted with. Everything was kind of going along. I don't know what happened there. And then I ended up meeting years later a guy named Sheldon Lettich. We became writing partners. Sheldon and me did a short film in 84, 85 called Firefight. He met Mark DeSalle while he's editing it. Mark came to my studio. I pitched him my screenplay, and Mark said, well, since it's been everywhere, let's kind of redo this. And so Sheldon and me started writing it. We had the same representation. Mike Frankel was our attorney. But as we got through it, Sheldon all of a sudden started using his leverage and basically leveraged me out of the story. Any credits to me came out of the story. And so what ends up happening is everybody sees story by Sheldon Lettich and screenplay by Sheldon Lettich, but it was actually developed by the two of us. Although at one point, as we were writing it, I stepped away from it. I said, okay, if you're going to really make it yours, then make it yours. And so I kind of stepped away. And then when I did, Sheldon made all these parts in the screenplay that read like Rambo. It was like, why are you putting a Rambo movie into Bloodsport? That isn't what the story is about. Years later, I find out, he used it the way it was told to me. He did that because he needed a sold screenplay that he could show to Sylvester Stallone, and he used that to secure himself a position with Stallone in getting hired on to help write Rambo 3. In the meantime, he violated the contract because the contract says it has to be a based on true event story. The way people think is they thought they bought my life rights. No, they didn't buy my life rights. They bought the option rights to the very first story I had. And so all the contracts reflect that. There are amendments to the contract where they fictionalize things like me breaking into my instructor's home to get the sword. If you remember that in the movie, we had to change the contract physically because everything was supposed to be based on true events. So when people say it's a fiction-based story, they don't know what they're talking about. All the memorization evidence is there. I have in the contracts, it actually outlines all the materials I had to supply to the company for it to be made as a based on true event story. There's, of course, obviously there's no breach. If you go to my website, Frank Dukes, Bloodsport.com, there's an article on there, Bloodsport, Not a Fiction. I think that's the name of the title. If you look in there, and it actually has the screenshots of actual stuff out of my contract that proves everything I'm saying is correct. Even outlines all the materials I basically had to supply the company. And out of supplying the things, they go, oh, wow, this is super impressive. We're not going to give you one card. we're going to give you 4 credit cards at the end, enrolled credit cards at the end of the movie. That's why it says, the movie's based on true events. It lists my world records, lists that I founded the first American system in ninjutsu, and I can go on. So it's all there for everybody to see. But that's basically how it all. That's the true genesis of Bloodsport. Whereas if you listen to Sheldon,
it's fascinating. It's a fascinating history there that you gave us. Now the movie itself,
yes,
Bloodsport itself. What I wanted to ask you were, how instrumental and involved were you in the casting of the movie?
Oh, great question. I was there for everything, right down to even picking Jean-Claude Van Damme. Jean-Claude had done a movie called No Retreat, No Surrender. It was brought to my attention that to see this movie, because he looked just like me. And in fact, if you look, again, you go to my website, frankdukesbloodsport.com, you look at it, you'll see pictures there of me and him at that time when I fought. We'll look very much identical. And that's how he got caught. He got picked. Now, I understand he had a run-in with Menachem Golan and they met, but what was the kicker was I went to bat for him, and I fought for this guy who's an unknown. And you got to understand, look from my point of view, they wanted to put in like Michael Dudikoff or somebody who had a following to play me in the movie. And that was more of a guarantee the movie would get released, more of a guarantee to have an audience, because you have a name actor, right? And instead, here I am saying, no, let's go with this unknown, and let me train him for 3 months. I'll make him spectacular. And I did. If you look at the difference in his movements, and I'm not trying to say this from a bragging point of view, but a real technical point of view. If you look at his appearance and how he moves in No Retreat, No Surrender, or you see in other films that he's done, he's very, very stilted. And when I got a hold of Jean-Claude, I worked for him for 3 months. We worked tirelessly, 3 days a week. He'd come to my school after I closed classes, like about 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. And we worked past midnight to get him really crisp, smooth. And I also was very blessed to have a guy named Hubie Kearns in my life. Now, Hubie Kearns was the stunt coordinator. He doubled Adam West in Batman, but he was one of the stuntmen Hall of Famers. He really was an expert at movie making. He met Bruce Lee when he was doing the Green Hornet, and he's the one who basically taught Lee movie fighting. And so here I have the guy, the master, taught Lee all these secrets of movie fighting, and he's teaching me. And I met Red Morgan, and that's where I came up with different ideas on like how to play with shutter speed. Nobody done that. Everybody's played with film speed, but nobody played with shutter speed when it came to making this film. Also the angles. I fought for different angles. David Worth and me sat there for hours. Every day we made sure we rode together back to the hotel in the same van, and we went over the different angles. And David is brilliant. I mean, he's really brilliant. And we came up with a different way to shoot this movie that nobody had shot before, where I said, look, I took this guy who's really got a great background in dance. He can memorize like multiple movements. And instead of doing all these chop movements, what if we kind of shoot 3 cameras and we do a long through the whole choreography? It doesn't stop. Okay. We just run it, the whole fight scene this way. And unfortunately, there's some stuff that never made it to the movie that I thought would have been brilliant. There's an aerial fight scene that we did. It was just, I mean, it took your breath away, but ultimately they cut it the way they wanted to cut it. Carl Kress was an Academy Award winning editor who edited the film. I don't like it when people try to kind of hone in on that. Say, oh yeah, Jean-Claude edited it and that's what made it so great. No, Jean-Claude, he did add to it, but Carl, you got to give Carl the credit for how he assembled that film. And because of my background in actually writing Bloodsport, I did a lot of things in there that I made sure were in the script that would translate over to when I was the choreographer. I choreographed that movie as well. And so as a choreographer, I made sure that I could do what we call in movie making foreshadowing. I could set up scenes early on in the movie that would pay off later, like the how to reach deep down in yourself and find that moment of respite when everything's kind of taken away from you by surprise. No matter how great your plans are, right, in life, all of a sudden something will come out of nowhere and it'll just totally tank you. That's one of the messages of the movie, and I made sure that came across in the action.
And I'll tell you, Frank, every great movie has to have a menacing villain, has to have a heel.
Mhm.
And did you cast the gentleman who fought Jean-Claude Van Damme's character in the final scene?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Bolo
'cause
Young.
what a great character he was in that movie. What a great villain. Menacing.
The credit for that has to go to, I think, Madeline Chang. She's the one who really convinced him to come on board for this project. But what people don't realize is Bolo, when I got a hold of him, he didn't have a black belt in martial arts. He's Mr. Asia. I mean, as far as bodybuilding goes, and his movements, if you look at his fight scenes in Enter the Dragon, they're very limited. Whereas here now he's going to be the arch villain. So I had to work with him quite extensively before we did the movie and on the set. He wonderful man. When I think we did the movie, he was only as high as a brown belt in Taekwondo. And I met his son on the set. It was very nice. But he was a true professional, listened to everything I had to say and really evaluated it. And then again, like I said, working with David, we were able to really play with that camera and make him look so good and so menacing. Just the angle. I mean, just the angles of I remember David one time saying, let's just cut it, not straight on, but let's cut him way to the side and have him jump and scream. And that's when you see that moment in the film where Jean-Claude goes down, he's blinded, and you see him like turn from him and he's caught up in that moment. And I've seen guys get caught up like that from my years of experience because they're so, when you do raw fighting like that, it's not like fighting with gloves. I can't explain to people. Maybe it's the blood, the smell of the blood, but you get such an adrenaline high on it. You lose yourself in the moment. You don't know what's kind of going on there. And it's very easy for a guy to like take in the crowd while they're cheering him and whatever, and just forget about what's gone on and then go back to the fight. I think you're seeing a little bit of it like now with these bare knuckle fights they've been holding in Florida. You're starting to see a little bit of that kind of that rush. You can, if you look at the guys carefully.
Sure. And obviously the reason that I say Bloodsport, like you said, great plot, great fight scenes, but also, speaking of foreshadowing, it foreshadowed what was to come in combat sports with the Ultimate Fighting Championships.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why, I really feel it's the most influential fight movie of all time. And I want to bring Bob in here, Bob Carson. Bob, I want to ask you about your friendship and your history with Mr. Dukes.
Well, I appreciate it. And you know what? This is Bloodsport is, I think, the most influential movie of the combat sports martial arts genre released in recent history. You know why? Because everybody's still talking about it. This movie was going on, released, 87, 88, around there. And we're well over 30 years. People are still talking about it. We're talking about documentaries that have come out. And Frank has been a hot button issue for quite some time now. And, look, if you go back to, I interviewed Frank beginning in 2009. That was my introduction to Frank Dukes, because I had on a gentleman named Zane Frazier, who was a karate fighter, who fought in the Ultimate Fighter. And Frank and Zane had a fight at one of the UFCs. And, I'm not going to get into details.
Well, no, I want to interject in that as well, because I interviewed Art Davie for the 29th anniversary. Actually, it was an old interview that they used that I'd interviewed Art. And And Hannibal asked Art, he said he wasn't there when this altercation took place. So he didn't really know what actually happened. He was only going off of what Zane Frazier said. And I'd like to give Frank Dukes an opportunity to talk about what transpired there. Was at a convention.
Well, what it was the Draka martial arts convention. I just broken a world record in Paris, France. I became the only human being to punch through bulletproof glass. And how do I say, I did 4 other world breaks on that tour, that nobody had ever seen before. And that caught the attention of a Saudi prince or somebody in the family there. They wanted me to do my own event. And I would have been the way I don't want to make this clear. It wasn't $1 billion guaranteed fight like a Mayweather, but the way they were proposing it, they said you're going to be the $1 billion fighter because of the equity involved. And they were right. I mean, if you look at the UFC today, it went for $13 billion. So their estimates were right on the money. And so around that time, I was being I was contacted by someone out of Art Davies' office. I guess a year before the debut of the fight, they were talking about doing they wanted me to fight an exhibition fight because I'd just done one in Barstow, California with Bloodsport 2 producer, where I took on all comers. And the idea was, that I would fight in this thing, and they were going to call it the Ultimate Fight Challenge because my name was the Ultimate Fighter. That was my handle way back when. And Bloodsport was also advertised based on that as the Ultimate Fight Contest, the Ultimate Fight Champion. And that's where really the title came from. I turned it down because I said, well, where are you going to host it? What are the guarantees money-wise? And it just wasn't a good fit for me. Nothing more than that. But then I had this other opportunity coming along, and here's Zane Frazier for a year hounding me, trying to get me into fighting this Ultimate Fight Championship, the very first one, before it even launched, to the point that I had to take a restraining order on the guy. There was an actual restraining order on him to stay away from me. And my attorney advised me never, ever throw a punch on this guy. He's already sued you in court because he claims, your secretary hit him in the eye with a closed door. And I ended up in a what do you call it, workman's comp case, because he said, his eye got hurt from the door slammed, and it was a ridiculous greed case. So there's bad blood between us from that day on. And, he was a natural guy to kind of get on my thumb and try to force me to get into this event. When we're at the event, here comes Zane with an entourage of guys, and he's doing this Mau thing, and it's like out of wrestling. Oh, you said I hired a killer to kill me and my wife. And I'm like, well, if I said I hired a killer to kill you and your wife, what are you doing here? And why are you, why aren't the police here? It's that simple. And it was really obvious it was a publicity stunt. It was really just to get attention, and he had already been asked to be in the fight. He actually admitted it on a Bob Carson's show at one time. That's one of the reasons Bob and me met. He was on the show there previous to me. He even said he was asked a year before to go on to this fight and how they approached him. So, cutting to the chase, the guy, I embarrassed him. I said, you know what? You really want to fight me, Zane? There's a ring right there. We can step into it right now. Forget all this. Well, that was counterproductive to what the reason he was there for. And that was to get publicity for this event. So he got all heated up. People were laughing at him. He came back like 30 minutes later with brass knuckles. And while I was bent over signing an autograph for a kid at just setting up the booth, he hit me from behind. And it shows in my medical conditions. I had I have 4 square indentations in my skull from being hit with brass knuckles. But in all fairness to Zane, and show you where I try to keep my integrity, the fight didn't end with Zane. It ended with another 3-4 guys jumping in on me, and any one of them could have possibly hit me. That's why he never got charged. Okay, I want to make that clear. They couldn't identify who is the actual person who hit me with the knuckles, so therefore he got a pass on that. He was arrested. I was never arrested, although when you look at the way people portray it in the press, we got in a fight over a business deal. No, we didn't. I was hit without warning. The CCTV cameras captured it. The CCTV cameras captured me fighting off 4 top fighters of the UFC. I won't mention their names because it's obviously a publicity stunt went bad. I'm not going to hurt somebody reputation who may have made a mistake in their life. You know, that's just my character. I know what it's like to be a fighter. I know what it's like, the games you have to play to kind of get attention and get in that and have a career. So, you know, I always have a fighter's heart. I always think of the fighters. I'll protect them as long as I can. They know they made a mistake. And that's it. And I held my own against them. I ended up with a tremendous judgment. And if not for that judgment, financial judgment in my favor because of what had happened. I mean, it was over quick because you had the camera footage, you had everybody there who saw what happened. It was not an altercation. It was not a fight. I never threw one punch on Zane. I tied him up and I had him, you know, on the ground, and I had him all. I was getting ready to put on a triangle choke. To be quite honest with you, when his guys jumped in and started kicking me in the back of the head and getting hit and breaking free.
That's the story I heard, that it was a sucker punch situation, and then you were able to get the better of him afterwards. But it's a famous story that a lot of people talk about because of the Bloodsport movie, and also because of the timing of that. That was when they were just starting to promote the initial UFC. Yeah. But I want to turn it over to Bob again, because Bob, you've done some training with Mr. Dukes as well over the years.
Yeah, and just to kind of go back to what I was saying earlier, Zane, after that, Zane got launched into Ultimate Fighting, the UFC 1. And so, you know, again, I'm trying to remain impartial, but that could be an indication of some sort of city event, because Rorion Gracie saw this, and Art Davie, but Art Davie apparently was not there, even though it's written in stone that he was there. But this was the launch of Zane Frazier, you know, fighting in the UFC. But yeah, listen, I had an opportunity to meet and train under Frank back in 2010, and let me tell you, if anybody doubts that Frank Dukes is a master of martial arts, a good fighter, I invite you to train with Frank. Take my word for it. He definitely is, and that's just me as a lifelong martial artist training with somebody. You know, sometimes you don't know. You see someone online, or you think you know, but you don't know until you're there. Until you're physically training with somebody. So I had an opportunity a little bit to attend some of his seminars and train with Frank. This is going back to 2010. And, I can also say, just based on me knowing Frank has done a lot of good for individuals that have would be categorized as disadvantages. You know, people like my good friend Justin Ray Harvey, who has severe cerebral palsy. Is Frank Dukes' #1 student. Justin has been really, really an inspiration to many. If you look at Frank has also worked with Les, who's a disabled martial artist going back many, many years ago. And I'm just saying this objectively. I'm not here to carry water for anybody. I'm just saying this is part of the record here when it comes to Frank Dukes. And I often think it gets overlooked by so many people out there who want to attack him. And I will say another thing too, and I'll throw it over to you guys, is that ever since I've had Frank on, I've had him on intermittently, since 2009, Bob Carson, have been the subject of attacks. I'm not going to mention any names. I've been the subject of harassment campaigns, okay? And I'm not making that up. And I was attacked and targeted solely because I had Frank Dukes on my platform. And when I had Frank Dukes on, when I've interviewed Frank, I've interviewed him with other members of the Black Dragon Society. I've interviewed him himself in person. I can tell you, I'm not a Stepford for anybody. I conducted fair and challenging interviews many times, and I have been the subject of harassment and a campaign. So there are people out there that hate Frank, that want to smear Frank, that want to smear people that even associate themselves with Frank. And that is an absolute fact, regardless of what you think on these issues. That is absolutely true. And I could speak to that firsthand.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do, something we hadn't done on the show, because we've got someone here with like the iconic movie, the iconic story, is it's a name game, and I'm gonna throw a name at you, Frank, and just give me your first reactions and impressions about these individuals. And the name I'll start with is Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Do you want one word?
No, however you want to,
or-
kind of. But just what's your first reaction? What comes to mind when I say Jean-Claude Van Damme?
Jean-Claude in my life is a great example of be careful what you wish for. He got what he wanted, and it undid his life.
Okay. What about let me throw another one from Hollywood fight movies. Steven Seagal.
Steven's an enigma. I admire Steven.
Right. Now, what about Sly Stallone?
Same thing. And I very much admire Sly. I love the way he tells stories.
Great. And Jack, do you have any names you want to throw from Hollywood?
Well, I have a Hollywood-esque question in just a minute, but we have a fan question from Long Story Short asking if Mr. Dukes spent any time in the Kowloon walled city.
Oh, yeah, very much so. In fact, I'm one of the few people, before they got rid of it, was actually able to travel below it. Okay, there's a Kowloon is a very interesting place. You had buildings with millions of people living underneath it, or where it was built up, where the buildings are like attached to each other. And it was quite an experience. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, there was just no building codes at that time, and when they built these things, and they just kind of interconnected, and you could walk literally a mile, 2 miles, and it'd be shops, and it'd be anything and everything you could ever imagine. And when we did the movie, by the way, I want to make this very clear. When we did the movie, when you see the characters, see Jean-Claude Van Damme and Don Gibb, who plays Jackson, and of course Van Damme playing myself, and they walk down below in the very beginning. That's the real walkway that's real. That was actually real footage. That is not a stage. That's not something else. That's actually the walkway in.
Awesome. And of course, when we say the name Frank Dukes, one of the reasons I got on Mr. Jack Kilby there is that's the lead role that Van Damme played in the Bloodsport movie, Frank Dukes, and in the subsequent sequels. And that was a question I wanted to ask you about. There were some Bloodsport sequels, and I know a friend of mine that I did a book with, Eric Paulson, played a Russian in one of those. Were you involved in those sequels?
Not at all. But there's an interesting story behind it. The guy who did Bloodsport 2 was a guy named Mike Corcione. He's the actual guy who actually kind of took it over. It was they basically Alan Merez bought the project from Mark DeSalle. They didn't do anything with it. Mark didn't do anything with it. He did a quick turnaround. I think he made like $10 million just from buying the rights and just kind of throwing something together. I was supposed to work on actually Bloodsport 2. Jean-Claude told Mike Corcione that I was working on on the Quest, which was obviously didn't happen, to keep me away from Bloodsport 2. And but Mike, in doing his own vetting of me, just so you understand that what happened, because the movie came out, I basically kind of issued a challenge when the movie came out in 1988, because of everybody's like, talk. They like to talk in Hollywood, and they talk up a good game themselves. I was just like, okay, here I am. And Mike Corcione basically said, okay, let's host this fight in Barstow, California. All the guys from, it's within driving distance of San Diego, LA, Las Vegas, Arizona, real easy to come to. Utah, let's host it there. And a lot of big names were contacted, and I put on this fight. And I had only one condition, and he talks about it on Justin's interview, as a matter of fact, Justin Harvey's interview, and that was I fought everybody blindfolded, just like in the movie, because I wanted to eliminate that idea that, oh, it's so hyped that you could never win a fight if you're sight impaired. Well, I was taught to fight sight impaired, and that actually really did happen. In fact, there's an interview on my website, and it was also, I think, in the documentary "Put Up Your Dukes" with Dr. Alan Day, Dr. Lawrence Day. Sorry, Dr. Lawrence Day, who basically, he's the head of the Black Dragons. He was in my corner when I fought, and he talks about how they use liniment. It wasn't powder. In the movie, you see powder, but in those days, it's very common to use Titdow to basically take away the injuries that you have, and it comes up through your pores a lot. And so it's this liniment, burning liniment, and they flicked it off into my eye and burned my eye. So, and I still have an eye injury as a result of that. But he was there. He documented that, and like I said in the movie, I fought everybody. I sparred with everybody. I want to say fought, but I sparred with everybody, blindfolded, and held my own, and pretty much dominated, to be quite honest with you. And I was still, you got to remember something. That was 1988, and I retired in 80. So I was 8 years retired when I did that.
Awesome. Now, we talked about those sequels, but this is something that I was talking with Bob about earlier. Mm-hmm. The gentleman Sheldon Lettich that you originally he was your right hand man. He was Team Dukes for a while, and then it seemed like he flipped over to become Van Damme's boy. And do you think that was so that he could do movies with Van Damme subsequently?
Well, that's where all this stolen valor crap comes from. Okay, remember I was telling you about Rambo and how I put those scenes in it. So what happens is he violated the contract. Mel Friedman and Chris Cosby had to come in and repair Bloodsport and really put it back. What you're really seeing in Bloodsport is really the work of, I think, Mel Friedman and Chris Cosby more than Sheldon. Although Sheldon did have a lot of things, but there's nothing he wrote in there as far as Bloodsport itself that really didn't come through me. Sheldon wanted a career, and he wanted to poison my relationship with Jean-Claude. So all of a sudden, at that same time, here comes all these bogus flyers saying I was a Medal of Honor winner, or I'm this, I'm that. And I've never made those claims. Anybody around me who's been close knows those claims. And it was just Sheldon was stabbing my back. When I confronted him about it, even when the LA Times came out with a hit piece on me in 1988, when the movie came out, my detractors paid off this guy to write an editorial, which really only gained ground when the internet happened, by the way, because nobody took it seriously when it first came out. It was buried in the back section of the LA Times and the San Fernando section, and it's an editorial. It's not even a real article. It said my instructor didn't exist. I bought the trophy. Just the most hoaxy things you could ever say to inflame people. But it was all done to protect what was an ongoing consumer fraud and about ninjutsu being a martial art. And they just wanted to say, oh, I'm a fake ninja. And I was trying to pass myself off as this when it was the opposite. And Sheldon kind of got in with that crowd. And it was to his benefit. He drove a wedge between me and Jean-Claude this way. But whenever I confront him, he'd be like my best friend. It wasn't until years later that it all kind of came out. And I go, here you are. When I confront you, you're lying to my face, but behind my back, you're the one really doing this. And what's interesting is one of the pamphlets that they use as evidence to say, I claim I won all these medals and all this stuff, uses a headshot. That headshot was taken by Sheldon when we did this short film called Firefight that I helped produce for him to help him get his career going. So with Sheldon, it's just nothing but a total betrayal. Where he's really upset is when I sued Jean-Claude Van Damme over the Quest because, I wrote that. And if you look at the screenplay cover page for the shooting script, it says story by Jean-Claude Van Damme and material supplied by Sheldon Lettich, based on material by Sheldon Lettich. And the reality is, it was written by myself. Then I ended up, the ICM they wanted a bigger budget, so they said, okay, we want to attach Ed Kamar's name to it and do a rewrite. So they did a rewrite of my screenplay. I ended up getting hit by Zane Fraser, ended up in a coma, was going to die. Sheldon actually came to my VA room. He thought I was out. I could barely open my eyes. I couldn't function, but I could hear, and I could hear him on the phone talking about how they were going to take this project away from me, and they did. And it showed you what's kind of interesting. And and this is a very, I think, interesting point how the universe works. If it wasn't for Zane Fraser hitting me and getting that sneak attack on me, I would have dropped dead because I had brain tumors from the days I fought. All right. They found them because of that. And because I ended up with a lawsuit of that and I got the money, I had enough money to pursue Jean-Claude Van Damme over the Quest. I didn't get money out of it, but I did get my credit. It's on the screenplay. Wasn't there before. You can look at the poster. You can see my name on the Quest, story by Frank Dukes. And it also outed Sheldon and Jean-Claude for what they were doing. They're taking credit for my work for a number of years. I was ghostwriting on a number of things and not getting my credits for it. And they were doing that and diminishing it because I think they felt they were more and more dependent on me. When that all busted, I mean, you look at his career, everything went straight to video after that. There hasn't been a hit after. They haven't been able to reproduce anything that looks like the work I did when I was with them. I was the third leg to their stool,
Yeah, it's so true. So true, Frank, because if you look at the trajectory of Jean-Claude's career, and Bob and I were discussing this earlier, I felt, because I've watched some of this other stuff with Viking Samurai with the Sheldon Lettich and try to figure out what this guy's angle is. It seems that he latched onto Jean-Claude so he could do these subsequent movies, but these movies never reached anywhere near. Not even a fraction of the level of Bloodsport, and it seems rather transparent that that's what his game was. But I want to bring Bob Carson in here because we have Bob. We're lucky to have Bob on as a guest as well, and Jack Kilby is in addition to co-hosting this show, he is also running Great North Wrestling, and we have Shoot Pro Wrestling, which is going to be legitimate grappling matches on the show that I'm broadcasting for. And Bob Carson has another nickname besides Bullet Bob Carson. We call him Andy Kaufman 2.0 because Bob Carson has a history of wrestling women and beating women and punishing women. Bob is an experienced grappler. He's won some of his local Naga tournaments, wrestling other males. But his shtick now is Bob is claiming himself to be, he's the self-proclaimed intergender champion of the world. And Bob, Andy Kaufman 2.0, there's a wrestler up at Great North Wrestling named Arnold. I just got a text from Arnold named Nova, and this young lady she said she'll wrestle men, and this is going to be a straight up legitimate match. Bob Carson, I want to give you the floor for a while to talk about intergender wrestling.
I don't think I've ever lost to a woman. I would never lose to a woman. And surely this young lady from north of the border doesn't know what she's in for. Okay. I have a history of doing this. and I just wouldn't allow myself to lose, and I would just humiliate her. I would embarrass her. I would treat her as she needs to be treated, as all women need to be treated. They are inferior. There's no question about that. And I would love the opportunity to stretch her out there in front of the Canadian fans north of the border at Great North Wrestling. It would be an absolute honor. I'll even take on two women. I'll take on two. I'll take on her and somebody else in a mixed tag match. Whatever.
Handicap match. I love it.
With all due respect, Bob, to your accomplishments and your athleticism, I think you should take a look at Nova. They call her the elite athlete for a reason. She's about 5'9" and 180 pounds, and is no joke. So perhaps some research would be best applied there before throwing that out, because you'd hate to lose, wouldn't you, in a shoot to a female?
Well, never say never. It was obviously never say never, but I as Matt knows, I have a history, and I am a very supremely confident grappler when it comes to my prowess.
Bob has competed in MMA. He's won grappling tournaments at the local level, and I can tell you that I don't even have to look at this Nova. Bob will stretch her like a rubber band, and it would not bode well for her tag team partner if we do a mixed match where the girl can tag in and out, because Bob will humiliate this woman. And I think, Jack, I think I've got a clause here for this match. You pick Nova, you pick someone else, and if Bob polishes them both off via submission or pin, both of them within 5 minutes under those tagged handicap rules, they will need to come to Bob's estate in New Jersey and cook for him and clean for him, and we'll have to video it and rub his feet as well, and do their womanly duties. Because I think some of these women in combat sports right now, they've forgotten how to be women. And I've said it before to you, Jack Kilby. You remind a woman she's a woman, she'll reward you for being a man. And I think you guys up in Canada, you softies up there, you liberal panty waists, you've kind of, yeah, Bob, take a look at it, Jack. I'm dancing for you right now. I think you liberal panty waists up there in Canada, I think you've forgotten what it means to be a man and put a woman in her place. And I think Bob Carson's going to have to do it.
Get it on the line. Sign on the dotted line.
Well, if you folks want to get into stipulations, I'm the matchmaker and the booker, so I would say that I could come up with some stipulations too. And if you lost, both yourself, Bob, and the King would be at their disposal for an indeterminate period of time. But I should say that those views are not necessarily those of Great North Wrestling or Jack Kilby or the Hannibal TV. And especially not mine. So it'll be interesting. We'll have to see how that goes. But I would caution you both before any more statements are made to take a look at Nova's resume and another Great North Wrestling female competitor by the name of Jessica Black, who has done some work with AEW lately. They mean business, and gentlemen, it could be very, very detrimental to your careers going forward to step in the ring with them.
Well, let me interject there, Jack. She'll be known as Jessica Black and Blue after Bob's done with her.
Well, that remains to be seen. If I could ask Frank one question that has come up in correlation to the Bloodsport movie. In and around the same time, you see the Mortal Kombat franchise come to prominence. First the video game, and then those movies, the first two. Were you involved in that? And did you see well, obviously you saw the remarkable similarities between the story and that whole, especially the first movie, right down to the beach, the Bahamas-like setting, and the tournament. Did you have any involvement in that at all, or?
I had no involvement, but it was based on Bloodsport, based on my story. And I talked to, I forgot, one of the gentleman who's involved in developing that, and he brought. It was just something came up, like we were discussing another project, and it came out that he was involved in that and developing that, and he said, "Oh, you're Frank Dix. You're the reason, we have a Mortal Kombat," which was a very nice compliment.
Absolutely. We also have another fan question who, and I know this is a very extensive story, but they're asking about your history as an involvement with the CIA as an operative. Can you comment on that in a Reader's Digest form?
Well, first of all, I never was a card-carrying agent for the CIA, but you have to understand, I come out of the era of Iran-Contra, and that's when contractors were at a premium, I guess you would call it. And there's intelligence. Everybody thinks that everything works at the highest levels of the Navy SEALs. There's tier 1 is the highest level to go. Well, there's really, depending on where you are and how you see things, but there's at least 4 or 5 levels above that. And part of it is when you get to the second level above that, you're dealing with what they call mercenary. But even above that, there's other levels, and that's the area I dealt in. How can I substantiate that? Well, if you open up the U.S. Navy SEAL Spec War Manual, K431197, K4310097, you can go to the Department of Defense cool site. It lists all the courses. You look up that course, you'll see my name on the inside is Reagan. So my system, what I contributed, is still being used by the spec ops community to this day, if that's helpful to you. The other thing is they did, my book is probably the only book in the history of the CIA to actually be forced to issue a denial. They've never issued a denial over another book, but my book, The Secret Man, when it came out by HarperCollins, there's an old saying, fiction's never in need of denial. They killed the ABC primetime special that they did on my book and myself, that had interviews with the president of the Ukraine, the defense ministers of the Ukraine, Russia, Spetsnaz units, where I worked on biological weapons recovery during the height of the Cold War on a joint task force. Was probably, you saw the effects of a failure of that, which is called COVID-19. All right. So in my day, we were successful in stopping it. So I was involved in that. So that's another reason why possibly that they wanted to have the book not come out, or things come out, because of what took place later. So we can go on and on about it, but that's the easiest way for me to explain it.
Thank you. We have a question for both Bob and Frank. Customarily on the Old School Shooters podcast, as the title suggests, we ask each of the guests what the old school term means to them, both philosophically and in terms of mindset, and whether or not you believe that things were better back then. So that's kind of a 2-part question, or anything else you want to elaborate along those lines. We'll start with Bob and then hit Frank.
Awesome question. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it. Old school to me is adhering to principle, adhering to loyalty, not going with what is the popular trend at the moment. It's a philosophy that those have, that listen, we celebrate our past, we celebrate old school traditions in the face of overwhelming oppression from those out there that aren't, want to destroy old school behaviors and traditions. Old school people are very, very traditional. In a sense, they're in their own world. They're proud of that and whatnot. And it's a mindset. It definitely is. In the world of combat sports, you don't have old school people now anymore. Everything is, it's not that old school people don't adapt. They do. You have to adapt. But they are set in certain ways and certain principles.
Yeah, and I just want to say it's going to be very old school when Jessica Black and Blue and Nova are scrubbing the toilets at Bob's estate and scrubbing his feet and peeling grapes for Mr. Bob Carson, because he's going to destroy those young ladies.
Well, again, we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see on that. That's for sure. Frank, do you have your thoughts on the old school terminology and mindset, sir?
I think old school conjures up all sorts of different imagery in our imaginations, but for me, old school is really just rooted in when something's raw, underdeveloped, learning your way, and that's kind of what it was for me. You know, look, when I was coming up, they used the term old school, and they're using the kettlebells, and we had gone to something totally different. You know, that's when Nautilus was just kicking in and things like the machine. So it's so easy to get caught up in what we call get caught up in our own imaginations is, I guess, the best way to put it. But to me, old school is tradition. It's the past. It's what we leave behind and what we build on. If you're going to say old school, I just say it's the shoulders that we build on. That every generation builds on the shoulders of the generation before it. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's the true history of martial arts, going all the way back to the Stone Age. I mean, you know, we're not swinging stones now, but you know, we built upon the technology, and that technology gives us more tactics, and we build again. But the strategy is the same. The core of man is the same. So, what I always try to tell young people, and I think it's really important for them to understand, is that you have to find your own way. I mean, for me, I was a rebel. I didn't do old school. If you look at me, I'm one of the first cross-training fighters of all time. When I fought, it was frowned upon to go in the gym and lift weights. It was frowned upon to train in multiple different disciplines, like learn jiu-jitsu, karate, kickboxing, boxing. I mean, I was doing capoeira. I was so far ahead of the pack in that I was studying ancient art forms in Mongolia and the Mongolian wrestling. I was making it really work for me. So old school to me is more of a term that connotates tradition, but part of tradition is to build. So it becomes this full circle if you look at it properly. You know, what is old school today, you know, or what's modern today will be old school tomorrow. Let's be realistic. And so it's important that we honor the past, we honor what's going on, and we keep our eyes on the future of where we're going. You know, that's where the balance is important to me.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, we have clearly blown through this hour rather quickly. Very, very engaging discussion. Where can we find you, Bob, and Frank on social media, sirs?
Jack, yeah, again, it was a real pleasure. We appreciate Frank and King. As always, it's great talking to you guys. I hope to talk to you guys in the future. I gave people my Instagram handle, but Facebook, I probably should give people my Facebook handle. It's the same handle. I'm more active on Facebook, facebook.com/Bob Carson MMA. I have almost 4,000 followers there. And you can also friend me or follow me on Instagram at the same handle, Bob Carson MMA. And if you want to check out some of my earlier podcasts with Frank Dukes and others, old school podcasts where we actually talk about things and not ask just about UFC and current events, go to blogtalkradio.com/Carson's Corner. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Frank?
I would say please check out my website, frankdukesbloodsport.com, for information. You'll find like 300 pages of links just to the evidence they say doesn't exist exists. And also you can find me on The Real Frank Dukes on Facebook. I'd love to talk to people, interact with people.
And you know,
Well,
Jack, I'm gonna hit the tagline, but before I do, to close us out, I want to sing a verse from a song that's applicable to all of us. It's a song that's very old school from the chairman of the board. I've been to town, up the boulevard and down the beach, and I've learned some things that only time can teach. Silver sages spreading knowledge to the younger ages. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Old School Shooters.
Love it.
Thanks, everybody. Catch you next time.